This episode is sponsored by the Spring Forward Writers Retreat. If you're someone who has a book as your luxury item and you've been sitting on it for a while, I've got just the answer for you. If you need somebody to hold your hand or help you do it as a work session in person, the Spring Forward Writers Retreat is happening March 14th to 16th of 2025. It's happening in beautiful Kissimmee, Florida. So if you're interested in that, if that's something you want to do, you want to knock out your book at the beginning of 2025, let's go. Because when you come, you're coming with your book as is. Whether that's with the outline, maybe just a few ideas that you put on paper, maybe you're coming starting from scratch. By the end of the weekend, you will leave with a rough draft. You will leave with a manuscript completed. So that is the tangible item you're coming away with, okay? So if you're interested, go to tinyurl.com/spring forward retreat. Good evening. Happy Wednesday, my winners and goal getters. Welcome back to the Getting the Win Show. I am your host, Mellissa T, the Procrastination Bully. If this is your first time checking out the show, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate you. Now, today we're touching on a subject that is a bit of a thorn in the side of anybody who is a recovering procrastinator. Okay. Tell me if you've experienced this. You've made a commitment to yourself. You promise, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, I'm done with it. And you're good for about a couple weeks, maybe even a month, maybe even a couple months. But you find yourself returning back to that habit that you told yourself you would stop doing. And before you know it, you find yourself back there and you ask yourself, how did I end up back here again? Now, tell me if this is you. You've experienced that multiple times. And now there's a guilt associated with it because now you're starting to doubt whether or not you even have the ability to change. Well, today I'm going to go over 4 different the 4 whens of change. Okay. I'm pulling this from the one and only Dr. John Maxwell. And this was imparted to me by one of my greatest big brothers in the world, this gentleman right here, Demias Perdue. He is a phenomenal life coach. He particularly coaches men in terms of their marriage, their business, like helping them become more whole, helping them become more emotionally aware, and helping them become more effective communicators in their relationships and in their lives. And there are 4 whens that will help us make a change and make it stick. So I'm going to go over those 4 whens and break the guilt cycle. Because if you're someone that has struggled with change, and maybe that's the reason why you're procrastinating on something, because you know it's going to require change and you doubt whether or not you're going to stick with it. Let's help you out. Let's provide some details that can help you get there. Real quick, I'm going to run down the 4 whens and then go into them in detail. Okay. First, when it hurts enough that you have to. Second, when you see enough that you're inspired to. Third, when you learn enough that you want to. And 4, when you receive enough that you're able to. Okay. So going back to that first one, when it hurts enough to have to. Can we be real? Those who are recovering procrastinators, we know all about that, don't we? Usually that's when we move the needle. When we get the needle on our behind is when we get inspired to move the needle. That's just the truth of things. Sometimes it does take hitting rock bottom or being caught between a rock and a hard place for us to change, especially if you're someone who doesn't like change, if you're someone who prefers steadiness, if you're someone who is big on structure, very rules oriented, you're very methodical. Change might be a struggle for you because it's a disruption, it's the unknown. You can't control what you don't know. And then there's that fear of failure that comes with that. The truth is, like, anything that is worth doing will have some unknowns to it, and you learn along the way. Remember the previous episodes, I talked about that worst case scenario. And if the worst case scenario is you feeling uncomfortable, by all means, move that needle, move forward, because your brain grows, our brains grow when we do hard or uncomfortable things. By the time we push through the discomfort, it's not nearly as bad as we thought it was going to be. You hear me say very often on the show, things tend to grow when they stay in our head. But the moment it's out in the open, the moment it's on paper, the moment we execute on it, the moment it becomes tangible, it shrinks down to its proper size and we can handle it. So if you're in that position where you want to change, it might be you might have to hurt to have to change. In which case, by all means, don't waste any more time. If you're in that situation where you are hurting, now is the time to change. Okay? Now is the time, because you don't have much time. That's the truth of it. No, it's never too late to start or restart, but the point is you don't have much time to do so, because none of us know when we're going to go. None of us know. Therefore, we have to approach life in such a way that every single moment is precious. Every single moment. All right. I have an episode in which I talk about the 4 C's of leverage, where we're going to talk about connecting with people and connecting with resources to reclaim as much of our time as possible. Because those of us who are recovering procrastinators, we know how much time we have burnt, and it ain't good. So the only option we have is to move forward. And in doing so, we move forward smartly by finding ways to reclaim our time. So that's when number one, when it hurts enough to have to. Now, a personal example in my personal life is my health journey. I was in a situation where I was in an environment with constant stress. And I say I was in the environment. The environment itself didn't necessarily cause the stress, but the way I was responding to all of the stimuli, I ended up stressing myself out. My perception was incorrect in some things. And that caused my body to go into like 4 alarm fire mode. Like there was so much stuff going on health wise. My diet was awful because I was comfort eating, stress eating, whichever version of that you want to use. I was turning to every form of escape that I could turn to in the short slivers of time that I had to myself. So my diet was awful. I was emotionally stressing myself, and that was starting to manifest into health challenges, adult onset asthma, and a host of other things, to the point where I ended up on a hospital table, getting cut open, not for the asthma, but for something much more severe. Hey, it was a situation where it hurt enough that I had to change. So shortly leading up to the surgery, about 3.5 months prior, I knew I needed to change my diet. I knew I needed to lose the weight. I was obese. I am 5'7", and the weight that is listed as like the top where you start to go into overweight is 157 for my height. I was 170 something. I kept vacillating between 170 and 180. I was always sliding in those areas in the year leading up to the surgery. So I knew I was going to have to change my diet. I just at the time didn't want to, because I was still in comfort and escape mode. I was still in recovery and survival mode. 3.5 months before I had that surgery, got on the phone with a vegan health coach in my mastermind. And she said, okay, when do you want to start? She made sure to have me assign a date. March 6th of 2024, I decided to go whole food plant-based. And the weight came right off when I did that. So sometimes you hurt enough that you have to change. And it's a good thing I did that because the surgery ended up being a much more major surgery than any of us were expecting, myself or the medical professionals that were working with me. Way more major. And the outcome could have been really bad. And I promise you would have been far worse had I not made that change in my diet, because the level of inflammation in my body would have been much higher. So, yeah, there are times when you reach the point where you're between a rock and a hard place and you ain't got no choice. Change is the only option if you expect to move forward, if you expect to survive, if you expect your life to continue. It's necessary. So that's when number one. When number two is when you see enough to be inspired to change. Have you ever, watched somebody on YouTube, been exposed to something that you've never seen before, or maybe you've heard about, you were kind of familiar with, but you didn't have a lot of detail about, and then you saw it and you're like, wow. And you sense something unlock within you. That's what that is. That's what number two is. Seeing something enough to be inspired to change. Jamal King, who's the author of this book back here, The 9 to 5 Millionaire, one of the drums he constantly beats is your level of exposure determines your level of success. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so exposure is a powerful thing to move the needle forward. And in one of my previous videos, as a step in the transformation process, I talked about obsessing over that thing and researching one example of a person who has already succeeded at your luxury item, whatever that luxury item looks like. That's exposure. That's seeing a thing often enough to be inspired to change. Sometimes it's not being caught between a rock and a hard place that can move you to change. Sometimes it's seeing a possibility model and being reminded, like, oh, I can do this. I forgot. Have you ever forgot something about yourself? You know what I mean? Like, have you ever forgotten your level of capability? Have you ever forgotten the successes you accomplished previously? Have you ever forgotten about the impact you've had on people's lives in the past? Like, that is a thing. And I'll be honest with you, that was something I was struggling with for a while. Like, in terms of creating this show, one of those first nags that I had was that whole imposter syndrome thing. Like, who am I to talk about this? And the truth is, I'm a great person to talk about it because I'm a recovering procrastinator myself. And I know the things that tend to hold us down when we're trying to move forward. I know the ball and chain. I know what it looks like. I know how annoying it is. I know that it likes to respawn and reattach. So I speak the language. I know the pains of the folks that are recovering procrastinators. You know what I mean? And I'm here to bully the procrastination in you because I know what that feels like. And I know what the other side also feels like. I know what the other side of being productive and being accountable to other people feels like. Is there some discomfort involved? Absolutely. Absolutely. Change will always involve some kind of discomfort. You've likely heard the metaphor with the caterpillar into the butterfly and how detrimental it is if you interrupt the process in the cocoon. If at any point you tamper with the cocoon to let the butterfly out prematurely, it won't survive. That pain and discomfort is necessary for the transformation to be complete. And the same is true for all of us. The same is true for me. The same is true for you. But yeah, do that exposure. Sometimes the possibility model, seeing what's possible, can be the fuel to light you up and go forward to your transformation, to change. When number three, when you learn enough to want to change, that's a powerful one. Number three, like learning enough to want to, because there's something so empowering about moving in your own agency and deciding, this is what I'm doing now that I know this. Because the beautiful thing about us is once we learn something, and connected to when number two as well, when you see what's possible and you're inspired to change, the human mind cannot revert to unknowing. Once you're exposed to something, you can't unsee it. Once you learn something new, you can't unlearn it. Once the mind is expanded, it will never return to its contracted state. That's neuroplasticity. We're capable of learning as much as we want to in this life. And that's the beauty of learning enough to want to change. So if your luxury item has something to do with that, if maybe there's a lack of information, a lack of expertise that's stopping you from moving the needle forward, by all means, get that knowledge. Get that knowledge. Naval Ravikant, who proposes the four C's of leverage, one of them is capital, which is synonymous for resources. And those resources can include people you know. It can include organizations you're a part of that can provide the information that you need to learn, to want to change. There's, of course, YouTube University. You can learn anything on here, man. You can learn anything on YouTube. And of course, there are plenty of books that are available, whether books in your house or at local libraries, at colleges, whatever the case may be. There is no shortage of information in this day and age. And even if you don't have access to tangible data, you have access to a person in some shape or form. Maybe that person is not the one that will give you what you need to learn, but they likely know somebody or know of a resource that can get you what you need and that you can learn enough to want to change. And trust me, I know the feeling of this tug of war. Sometimes they overlap. You know what I mean? Sometimes you're dealing with a situation where you do know enough to want to change, but maybe that's not enough for you to actually change. And sometimes you may have to put yourself in the situation where you're at number one, that first when you heard enough to have to, maybe. So just know that I'm aware. Like there are times when some of these apply to you, but you're like, yeah, but that's not enough though. So I get it. Just wanted to put that in there. The fourth when is when you have enough to be able to change. And this kind of touches on that side note that I just made, which is even if you have any of the other wins of change, they still might not be enough. So that fourth win is when you have enough that you're actually able to. Sometimes you need a person, sometimes you need money, sometimes you need certain other tools, sometimes you need like information, sometimes you need insert resources here. And there might be a gap in your process that may be stopping you from changing. Now, this goes back to what I said about talking to a someone, because talking to other people is always a way to discover what your gaps are. This is why I always propose that we are interdependent. We're wired to depend on each other. We can't always see our own blind spots. Self awareness is indeed paramount. That is an important skill to learn. But even with self awareness and emotional intelligence, there are still times where we'll have some blind spots, and someone else who is completely objective, who is looking at you and your situation from the outside in, can say, "Oh no, I know exactly what that is," and can tell you like, "Here, look at this." They'll text you a link to an article that's helpful, or they'll introduce you to another person that has the expertise that you need. Whatever the case is, though, once you have enough, then you have that fuel to change because now you feel like you have that sense of autonomy. One of the examples that I can share with you in my personal life is even in starting this particular show, this particular podcast. Sure, anybody can start a pod with just their cell phone, Like cell phone cameras are pretty good. There are, super cheap lighting setups that you can buy on Amazon or any place else that has it has the light on top and then the little bracket that holds the phone. And you can start with that. You can start with just that. I was in a situation where I know my own phone. It would not have provided good quality for y'all. Like y'all have been like, really? Really, Mellissa? I wanted to get the correct type of gear to be able to start, but I didn't use that as a means to not move forward. I leveraged the who. There's someone in my network that is well versed in this sort of thing, well versed in equipment, well versed in being on radio and podcasting because he's been in the media industry for decades. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. Like he provided links to the gear that he uses and was like, start here, And even in terms of the platform that I would use to distribute the show, he made a recommendation. I tried it. It was not a good fit for me. I kept looking. Like you can't let these things stop you, especially when your luxury item comes from the maker of all things luxurious. Like your idea is never really yours. It came from God himself. God told me, like, talk to your people. The folks that struggle with procrastination, talk to your people. Help them. This was an assignment from him. So there was no way I could let anything stop me. Now that I had the means to do it, there was no way that I could hesitate any further. So I used the who. I got the knowledge I needed. I got the expertise in terms of the gear that I needed. And then I started. So here's a little kind of footnote or sort of like a sub bullet for that fourth when you have enough to be able to change. The truth is, you may already have enough and not realize that you do. So, this is a moment where the procrastination bully is encouraging you to keep going because you may very well have everything you need starting right now. You have everything you need to be able to change because there is nothing that God will bring us to without equipping us to go through. You knew that round was coming, right? You're in a personal development space. You heard somebody say that. But yeah, like whatever God instructs us to do, he's going to also equip us before he gives us the assignment. Before. Because God is not an unfair dad. You know what I mean? He understands what his kids need. You have everything you need to be able to change. Mignon Francois, this beautiful lady right here. She says, you have everything you need to get from where you are to where you want to be. So I did want to put that asterisk there in terms of having enough to be able to change. You have enough to be able to change. Consider all of your resources available to you. And also remind yourself of all the different ways that you've made a difference before, all of the different ways that you've had an impact on people's lives before. That can also be a resource to fuel you forward. Sometimes we have to be reminded of how dope we are to know that it is possible for us to do the thing that we've been assigned to do, to restart the luxury item or finish it. So I want to make sure I remind you of that. Okay. You are deep and dope. You have people around you that are also deep and dope and are waiting to help you. They don't know you need the help because you haven't asked them yet. So ask them. Ask them. And even if you want to be careful, you want to guard your luxury item and not necessarily share any super specifics, that's fine. Just ask them about the thing that is related to your luxury item if you don't want to divulge too much. They'll still help you, and your idea will remain safe. Your luxury item will remain safe. But one, don't think that you're on your own. And two, don't continue to procrastinate simply because you don't think you have enough or you don't think you are enough. Neither of those are true. You're enough and you have enough to be able to change. So that fourth win is a universal principle for all of us. So if anything, if you're dealing with those first three and you're like, well, I am hurting enough to have to change, but I don't feel like it. Or, that second one, I've seen enough to be inspired to change, but dot dot dot. I don't think I can. I can't afford to. That's not for me. Or any of these sounding familiar? That person's lucky. They've had access to great people. That may be what you're dealing with. Or that third one, learning enough to want to. You're glutted with information, but you still haven't moved the needle yet. You still haven't started. Then let number 4 be the fuel. You have enough to be able to change. Call up your who, research your who, whatever the case may be. You are enough and you have enough to be able to change. Don't let anything else stop you. If you hear nothing else today, let this be the lesson. You have enough to be able to change. Ask questions of the people connected to you if you don't have money or if you don't have access to information. If you have access to information and don't know anybody, then offer yourself as a value to anybody you do know that can then connect you to the person you want to get to know. Arlen Hamilton says, become money. And the most effective way to become money is to acquire the information. So if information is the thing you have access to, by all means, synthesize it, paraphrase it in ways that are unique to you that you can convey to people in a way that they understand, and barter that value. Like, hey, I've learned this. I can't unlearn it. It's mine. I can use this to help you. I can use this to save time on your behalf. I have more knowledge of this if you need help with that. Okay. And of course, possibility models. Have possibility models as the reminder that you do have enough. Because any version of a success, they usually started either in a similar circumstance to you or in some cases worse off than you, which means it's definitely possible for you. Right? Sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but I do want to drive that point home. Because remember, I'm the procrastination bully and I am bullying the procrastination that's in you. I'm pushing you to move forward on your luxury item if you haven't yet. If you have any questions about this, by all means, pick up Demayas Purdue's book, Elevation Requires Change, because he tackles change throughout that entire book. It's an incredible resource. To my point earlier about resources, it's an incredible resource. And again, be sure to hit me up if you have the questions and you want to present it in a simplified way. Follow me on Instagram, Pinterest, and Threads at Getting the Win Show, and then shoot me a DM there. If you want to leave a comment on YouTube, do that there, and subscribe at Getting the Win on YouTube. And if you found this video valuable, share it with your peeps and hit the like button. It would be super helpful and help more people find the video. It'll be included in the algorithm and more people can find this valuable information. So thanks so much for tuning in. Of course, have a great rest of your Wednesday and a great rest of your week. Peace.